Flight 828 from Denver to Atlanta was fully booked on that overcast Tuesday morning. The departure lounge buzzed with the usual chatter. Families wrangling kids, business people checking emails, couples debating window or aisle seats. It was the kind of busy, loud hum that fills most early morning terminals. The kind no one really listens to white noise before takeoff. Gate attendants began the boarding process in the usual order: first class, military, special needs, then general boarding. Among the crowd, a woman in her late 40s walked steadily to the gate, boarding pass in hand, small duffel slung over one shoulder. She had no carry-on luggage except that single black canvas bag, worn at the edges, but held with precision, like it had traveled far and hard. Her posture was upright, her expression unreadable. Her name on the manifest: Eliza M. Shaw, seat 9A, occupation unlisted. Most people who saw her didn't really see her. A flight attendant greeted her cheerfully, "Welcome aboard." But the woman simply nodded and moved past. No smile, no chit-chat. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't stop for help. She found her seat quickly, stowed her bag under the chair in front of her, and sat by the window, resting her left arm along the armrest, palm down, fingers still. She wore no jewelry, no headphones, just a plain charcoal gray jacket zipped up over a light blue shirt. Her cropped brown hair barely moved when she turned her head to glance out the window at the tarmac below. The engines hadn't even started, but she was already deeply focused on something unseen. Other passengers trickled in. A young mother with a baby settled across the aisle. A college student with earbuds took 9C next to Eliza, but didn't even glance her way. He was too busy texting. Eliza didn't seem to notice him either. There was nothing outwardly memorable about her, and maybe that's why no one paid her attention, except for a child in row 10, a curious 7-year-old girl who kept peeking through the seat crack in front of her, eyes fixed on the woman in 9A. Something about the way the woman sat, so motionless yet aware, intrigued her. She nudged her father and whispered, "That lady looks like a statue." Her father smiled politely and patted her hand, dismissing the thought. The aircraft pushed back and began taxiing. The pilot came over the intercom with the usual updates estimated. Flight time just over 2 hours, weather clear over Georgia, some mild turbulence predicted over Kansas airspace. Flight attendants did their safety demo. Seat belts clicked. Tray tables locked as the plane climbed into the clouds. A few pockets of mild turbulence bumped the aircraft. Nervous laughs and groans followed. The college kid next to Eliza made a joke to no one in particular, pulled his hoodie tighter, and closed his eyes. But Eliza didn't move. She blinked once. Her eyes scanned the seatback in front of her, then slowly turned toward the window. She muttered something quietly, just one word, barely audible. Almost like instinct. She whispered, "Altitude." Turbulence worsened. Drinks were withheld. The seatbelt sign remained lit longer than expected. Around the cabin, heads turned. A baby cried somewhere behind row 14. The woman in 12B rang her attendant button 3 times in a row. No one answered. Suddenly, the plane jolted hard. Overhead bins trembled. People gasped. The young mother clutched her child. Even the college student opened his eyes wide, suddenly very awake. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, but this time there was no calm in it. "We've experienced a minor engine imbalance. Our crew is investigating. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened." A murmur swept through the cabin. Eliza adjusted her legs slightly, finally moving. She unclasped her seatbelt momentarily, not to rise, but to shift her posture, then clicked it back in. Her hands slid under her jacket sleeves. She exhaled slowly. From her jacket, she pulled out a rubber band and tied her hair back neatly, military style. Tight, clean, precise, like a ritual. The college kid beside her turned and said, "You okay?" She didn't answer. Her eyes had shifted from blank window stares to sharp tracking. She wasn't panicking, she was measuring altitude, the direction of turns, the change in pressure. Every rattle of the plane told her something. Her mind wasn't asking, "Are we okay?" but rather calculating how long before something failed completely. Still, she said nothing. She knew how panic worked. Silence, she believed, kept people calm. The woman across the aisle, meanwhile, had begun crying. She clutched her baby tighter and whispered prayers. Eliza glanced once in their direction and slowly extended her hand across the aisle. "Breathe slow," she said softly, almost like a lullaby. "Hold your baby tight, but don't hold your breath." The woman nodded shakily. Somehow, Eliza's voice calmed her. Even the child stopped crying for a moment. Flight attendants hurried down the aisle, whispering among themselves. One of them stopped at row 9, briefly meeting Eliza's eyes. She paused, as if sensing something different in this woman, then continued down. The cabin. A few minutes passed. The cabin lights flickered again, and somewhere inside the cockpit, red warnings began to light up one after another. The storm wasn't outside anymore. It was coming from within the plane, and the only person prepared for it was sitting in row 9. The sudden jolt wasn't just turbulence. It was sharper, more violent, and unmistakable sideways shudder that rattled overhead compartments and caused several seatbelt-less passengers to jerk upright. Luggage shifted. A laptop skidded off a tray, table, and hit the floor. Screams erupted near the rear of the cabin. Then the cabin lights dimmed for a full second before flickering back. "Captain." Rain's voice came through the intercom again, this time faster, tighter. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a technical irregularity with our left engine. We are assessing the issue and communicating with ground control. Please remain calm and stay seated with seatbelts fastened." But it was too late for calm. Panic spread like a wave, silent at first, then loud. A woman in row 18 started sobbing. A man stood up to retrieve something from the overhead bin, only to be firmly told to sit by a flight attendant, rushing down the aisle with her walkie clipped high and tight on her uniform. People looked around, searching for reassurance on the faces of strangers. In row 9, Eliza Shaw sat still, her eyes now fixed on the front wall of the cabin. She was listening, not to the cabin noise, but through it. Listening to the subtle, mechanical groans that most passengers couldn't hear, wouldn't know how to interpret even if they could. She closed her eyes, breathing in slowly through her nose. Left engine, she calculated. From the vibration alone, she knew it wasn't a total shutdown, but something worse. Partial failure. Still drawing power, still engaged, but unstable. Dangerous. The college kid beside her fidgeted in his seat. "Think we're okay?" he asked, his voice strained. Eliza didn't respond at first. Then she turned slightly, just enough to look at him with cold, clear precision. "Keep your belt on. Don't move unless they say. Stay calm." He blinked, suddenly unnerved not by the plane, but by her. The little girl in row 10 had stopped playing on her tablet, and now peered again through the seat crack. She was watching Eliza like she was watching a movie. Row 9 had gone quiet. Everyone else in nearby seats kept glancing at the woman who hadn't flinched once since the turbulence began. A man 2 rows behind muttered, "She's either sleeping through this or she's nuts." But Eliza wasn't either. She was calculating. Inside the cockpit, things were getting worse. Multiple caution lights lit up like Christmas on the control panel. The co-pilot, Dennis, wiped sweat from his temple as he struggled to re-establish a steady altitude. The left engine was losing thrust. It hadn't failed entirely, but was now unreliable. At any moment, it could seize up or worse, misfire. Captain Rains tapped his comms again, this time directly to the cabin crew. Prepare for possible emergency descent. This one's not holding. In the back galley, Flight Attendant Rhea had just heard the captain's message. She felt her stomach drop. She'd flown dozens of routes, dealt with sick passengers, disruptive passengers, mid-air injuries, but this was different. The tone in the captain's voice scared her. He sounded uncertain. She glanced up the aisle and paused. Row 9. The woman was just sitting there, still, watching, not scared, not confused, not praying, just watching. Something told her this woman wasn't ordinary. She moved closer, kneeling discreetly next to the seat. Ma'am, she whispered, are you a pilot? Eliza didn't answer immediately. She glanced up, just enough to meet Rhea's eyes. The look wasn't surprised. It wasn't even warm, but it was steady, familiar in a strange way. Used to be, she said finally. Rhea leaned in closer. Military? Eliza gave a short nod. Yes, what kind? Eliza didn't break eye contact. The kind who don't get interviewed after missions. Rhea's breath caught. She wasn't sure what that meant exactly, but she knew enough. She rose quickly and walked straight to the front galley, heart racing. She tapped the cockpit door 3 times, waited for the coded reply, then opened it. Inside, Rains and Dennis were scrambling. I think we've got a flight control problem, Dennis said, pointing to a flickering reading. Rhea interrupted. Captain, there's a woman in row 9, civilian manifest, but I think she's one of us. She said she flew military, special ops. Captain Rains turned toward her sharply. Name? Shaw? Eliza Shaw? Dennis froze. Rains stared. Eliza Shaw? Dennis echoed. Echo Sierra? You know her? Rhea asked, startled. Rains didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the PA mic. The intercom beeped through the cabin once again, crackling like an old radio. Passenger in row 9, call sign Echo Sierra. Please report to the cockpit immediately. Every head turned. Whispers swept the rows. The college kids sat up straight. The mother with the baby stared, confused. The man behind Eliza leaned forward, puzzled. But Eliza didn't hesitate. She stood slowly, smoothed the wrinkles from her jacket, and stepped into the aisle. Her steps were quiet, precise, intentional. Every eye followed her as she walked the narrow corridor toward the cockpit. The little girl in row 10 leaned into the aisle, mouth wide open, watching this woman, the one no one had noticed, now being summoned like some kind of secret weapon. Eliza reached the door. Rhea held it open, and she passed through without a word. And as it clicked shut behind her, the cabin remained silent. Because suddenly they all realized. The woman in row 9 wasn't just a quiet passenger anymore. She might be the only reason they'd lived to land. Inside the cockpit, the tension was thick. Captain Rains was sweating through his collar. Co-pilot Dennis was flipping switches and checking readings that refused to stabilize. The left engine had degraded to 34% thrust and was dangerously close to a stall. With strong headwinds ahead and thunderstorms sweeping in over Birmingham, there weren't many options left. Rhea, the senior flight attendant, stood off to the side as Eliza Shaw entered the cockpit calmly, confidently, without looking anyone directly in the eyes. She didn't need a grand introduction. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, her presence changed everything. Captain Rains turned slowly toward her, like he wasn't sure if he believed what he was seeing. Eliza Shaw? He asked, his voice lower than before. She nodded once. Echo Sierra. Dennis sat straighter, mouth parting. No way. You vanished. "You're a ghost. They said you disappeared after Kabul." Eliza gave the briefest of smiles, but it didn't touch her eyes. "Ghosts don't ride, Coach." Captain Rains exhaled. "I remember the files. Elite combat pilot, served with distinction, ran Black Air rescue missions off the books, and decommissioned early," she added. "After an op, no one wanted to take responsibility for." "But you made it out," Dennis said. Double quotes, "No, I got them out," she corrected. She stepped forward now, gaze shifting to the console. She read the chaos in seconds. Left engine failure wasn't total, but the loss of thrust was paired with lateral instability. Rudder compensation wasn't engaging. They were losing altitude faster than projected, and the plane's automated descent protocols weren't responding. The systems had given up, but she hadn't. Eliza's hand hovered over the manual flight yoke. She looked at Captain Rains. "Permission to assist?" Rains hesitated. In any other situation, he'd never surrender his seat to a stranger, civilian or not. But this wasn't any situation. This was survival. And the woman standing beside him wasn't just anyone. He nodded. Dennis slid his seat back. Eliza sat down like she'd never stopped flying. Her back straight, eyes focused, fingertips touching controls, like reacquainting herself with an old friend. "Begin a controlled descent," she said quickly. "Drop altitude to 12,000. Switch to manual rudder. Reroute all auxiliary power to stabilizers. Shut off autopilot completely." Dennis blinked. "But the weather," she didn't raise her voice, didn't bark like a drill sergeant, but she didn't need to. "Do it now." And they did. Outside, lightning cracked in the distance. Inside, the cabin felt heavier, like the air itself had realized something irreversible was happening. In row 9. Eliza's seat sat empty. Passengers whispered. Some leaned over to look down the aisle. The mother with the baby held her child tighter. The college student stared toward the cockpit, still processing what he'd heard. An old man in row 7 turned to his wife and said, "That's not just some ex-pilot. That's someone they used to call when missions went south." In the cockpit, Eliza guided the aircraft through the descent. Every movement was controlled. Precise. She reached over the COM switch. "ATC, this is Echo Sierra on flight 828. Emergency descent initiated. Current position, 40 nautical miles west of Birmingham. Requesting vector for immediate landing." The voice from Birmingham Tower crackled. "Repeat, did you say Echo Sierra?" "Affirmative," Eliza said. A pause. "Roger that, Echo." "Sierra, we've been briefed. Priority clearance granted. Runway 36L is clear." Dennis glanced at her in disbelief. "They briefed for you?" Eliza kept her eyes on the storm radar. "Let's just say I made a few friends in the right places." "A long time ago." Captain Rains was still stunned. "Why did you vanish?" "Because I didn't want to be remembered as the one who got lucky," she said. "I wanted to live normal. No cameras, no medals. Just quiet." She adjusted the thrust manually, compensating for the failing engine. It fought her, bucking. Slightly, but she didn't let it win. Dennis spoke again, softly now. "But you showed up when it counted." Eliza didn't respond to that. She kept flying. In the cabin, the passengers were oddly silent now. They had felt something change. The movements of the plane were sharper, cleaner, more purposeful. It was subtle, but real, like the plane was no longer being dragged by failing machinery, but driven by something human. Agent Torres, the air marshal, stood quietly near the cockpit, watching through the small window. He'd recognized her face the second he passed row 9. He'd read her name once in a buried classified file that said if you ever see her again, you're either incredibly lucky or in very deep trouble. He now understood it was both. The storm outside loomed closer. Winds picked up. Thunder cracked louder. Rain battered the fuselage, but the plane was descending steadily faster than ATC expected. But with expert control, back inside the cockpit, Eliza adjusted pitch, checked airspeed, and rerouted power again. Her voice steady. "We have one shot at this. No second chances. If we hit a shear zone on approach, we'll stall out. Keep flaps light until final." Captain Rains gave her a long look. "You haven't lost it." Eliza allowed herself a half smile this time. Didn't plan to use it again, but some storms come looking for you. As Birmingham came into view below, runway lights flickering through broken clouds, Dennis radioed the tower. "Tower, Flight 828, beginning final descent. We have Echo Sierra in command." The controller on the other end responded with awe in his voice. "Copy that. You're in the best hands we've ever heard of. Godspeed." And as the plane lowered into the storm, 33,000 feet now shrinking toward 10,000, one thing was certain. The woman no one noticed in row 9 was now the one person the world was counting on. The cockpit was bathed in blinking lights and quiet intensity. Every button, gauge, and warning light on the flight panel seemed to scream at once. Yet in the center of that chaos sat Eliza Shaw, calm, composed, and in complete control. The tension that had once frozen the crew was now replaced by something else. All she moved like the plane was an extension of her body, each adjustment purposeful, precise. Outside, the clouds swirled in thick gray layers. Rain lashed against the windows. Visibility was almost non-existent. And yet, Eliza's hands never trembled. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the shift, not just in altitude, but in energy. The aircraft, which moments ago felt unstable and unmoored, was suddenly responding to invisible hands that knew exactly how to guide it. People exchanged glances, whispered theories. Some prayed louder. Others just stared ahead, waiting. In row 9, her seat sat empty, a black duffel still tucked. Below it, a flight attendant paused as she walked by, glancing at the vacant seat with a curious look, like it was no longer just an empty place, but a monument to something unreal unfolding beyond the curtain. Near the front, Agent Torres stood with arms crossed, his focus locked on the cockpit door. He'd requested updates, but no one inside had time for conversation. And that, he realized, was a good thing. If Echo Sierra was working in silence, it meant she was focused. That meant they still had a chance. Inside the cockpit, Eliza adjusted the rudder input, countering sudden crosswinds from the storms. Edge. Dennis leaned forward, scanning the monitors. "Runway 36L is open, but tower says crosswinds are shifting rapidly," he said. "Could hit 25 knots gusting." "We'll take it angled. Manual assist," Eliza replied. "We cut thrust, tip into the wind, and drop it clean." Captain Rains raised a brow. "That's a combat descent," Eliza nodded. "Because this is a combat scenario. The enemy just happens to be airspeed and time." She reached for the PA switch. Back in the cabin, the intercom beeped once, and her voice flowed into every corner of the plane, steady, sure, and commanding. "This is Commander Eliza Shaw speaking. I'm assisting your flight crew in guiding this aircraft to an emergency landing. I need you all to remain calm and fully seated. We're heading into a fast descent through a storm corridor. It may feel unstable, but we are fully in control. I repeat, we are in control. Trust your crew. We will land. We will walk away from this." There was no sugarcoating, no corporate speak. Just the voice of someone who had done this before. Maybe not here, maybe not like this, but someone who knew the edge, had lived in it, and pulled others back from it. In row 10, the little girl, who had watched Eliza the entire flight, whispered to her mother, "That's the pilot now, isn't it?" Her mother nodded, wide-eyed. "Yes, baby, I think it is. The plane began to descend more sharply. The angle felt unnatural. The cabin tilted forward, and many passengers clutched their armrests. Cups rolled off tray tables. Someone screamed. Another threw up. But the descent didn't falter. In the cockpit, Dennis struggled to hide his nerves. We're coming in steep. We have to, Eliza answered, eyes locked on the monitor. Normal glide path won't hold us with one engine. Fighting, but we can ride it down like a bird in a dive. Captain Rains watched the woman beside him, this ghost from military legend, flying a commercial jet with a grace that felt more like instinct than training. You ever land a bird this heavy? He asked. Only once, she replied. Kandahar. No rear stabilizers. Night drop, crossfire below. Dennis looked over. How'd that end? She gave a small shrug. I'm still here. Altitude dropped fast. 6,000 feet. Then 4,800. The storm intensified. Lightning cracked directly outside the nose window. The plane shuddered. For a second, Dennis gripped the dash, but Eliza didn't even blink. Her voice remained steady. Gear down. Flaps to 60. Captain. Rains followed her commands without hesitation. Runway lights in sight. Eliza leaned in. Her eyes narrowed. There, through the storm veil, the landing strip appeared long, wet, illuminated like a lifeline in the dark. Birmingham Tower came through again. Flight 828, you're cleared for emergency landing. Winds at 230, gusting. You are the only traffic, Eliza responded. Acknowledged, Tower. Final approach confirmed. A deep breath swept the cockpit. Then she spoke to the passengers once more. Brace position now. Heads down, hands over heads. Stay buckled. Do not move until directed. And in row 9, her empty seat faced forward, like it was watching 2 below them. Ground crews scrambled. Fire trucks lined the strip. Ambulances stood ready. But everyone watching from below held their breath, not just hoping the plane would make it, but now quietly praying that the woman known only as Echo Sierra could pull off what no one else could. Inside the cabin, time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. The engines groaned as Eliza adjusted the final thrust. Captain Rains whispered, It's all you, Commander. Eliza didn't reply. She simply flew. Rain streaked across the cockpit windows, thin as needles and relentless. The runway lights below blurred with each drop, but Eliza Shaw saw everything with startling clarity. She was no longer just guiding a jet through a storm. She was reliving a past that never truly left her. For most of the passengers aboard Flight 828, Eliza was a stranger, a quiet woman in row 9, who had barely said a word before she stood up and walked into the cockpit like she belonged there. But 20 years earlier, she'd flown missions no one talked about, because they were never supposed to happen. Eliza Shaw had been the Air Force's best-kept secret. A specialist in black operations, covert extractions, mid-air insertions, storm-flying rescue maneuvers, and emergency landings on hostile ground. She flew the kind of aircraft that didn't exist on paper, with call signs no tower ever recorded. Her nickname, Echo Sierra. The woman who came when there was no one left to call. She'd once guided a crippled 100 to 130 out of a war zone, with 2 engines flaming and 20 soldiers aboard. Another time, she'd landed on an abandoned Afghan highway to extract a stranded medic. Team under enemy fire. Her feats were whispered in elite hangars and briefing rooms, always ending with the same line. If Shaw's flying, you've already survived. But all of that ended with a mission, buried so deep in classified records that even she rarely spoke of it. Kandahar, 2012. She and her crew were tasked with retrieving a downed satellite beacon before it fell into enemy hands. The mission failed, not because of her flying, but because someone leaked the coordinates. They were ambushed on arrival. Her co-pilot was shot. Her aircraft took a direct hit to the tail, lost hydraulics, lost communication. She had 22 souls on board, and she landed it anyway, blind, bleeding, half-conscious. Win the brass. Asked how she did it, she simply said, "I flew through the noise." The medal they gave her was handed over in silence. She never wore it. 2 months later, she retired. Quietly. No send-off. No photos. Just gone. Now. As she gripped the yoke of a Delta commercial aircraft, spiraling toward an emergency landing, that version of Eliza Shaw, the one they once called Echo Sierra, came alive again. Wind gusts increasing, Dennis called. Out beside her, watching the readings. We're down to 3,000 feet. You sure about this angle? If we come in flat, we drift. If we angle too steep, we stall. We ride the center, Eliza said. Flaps down to 100. Keep stabilizers loose. Captain Rains had fallen completely silent. Not because he wasn't needed, but because he'd realized he wasn't the lead anymore. Eliza was. Every command was measured. Every decision made without hesitation. Outside, the storm howled louder. Inside, her voice cut through it. Throttle easing. Nose down. Bring her to 190 knots. The plane groaned as it adjusted. The nose dipped into the current. Passengers gripped their seats tighter. An overhead bin popped open in row 14. A suitcase tumbled out and hit the aisle. A man screamed. A woman cried, but still no chaos. No uncontrolled dive. Eliza was holding the descent like a sculptor carving a statue from the storm. In the cabin, Agent Torres stood watchfully by the galley door, his mind spinning. He'd seen Eliza's name on a declassified document, once half redacted. Echo Sierra, it had said. Pilot Tier 0 clearance. Survivability Index, 98%. He dismissed it as myth. No one had that kind of record. Now, standing 30 feet behind her, watching the impossible become possible, he understood. Echo Sierra, he whispered under his breath. You were real all along. In row 10, the little girl peeked again through the seat crack. Her mother was crying softly, hands clutched together. The girl reached up and touched her mother's arm. It's okay, she said. She's flying. Back in the cockpit, Eliza exhaled deeply and focused. Runway 36L grew clearer with every second. Winds were pushing hard angled from the side. She had to land the jet not directly on, but into the wind, then correct for drift with a final rudder. Twist, landing gear down, she called. Dennis moved fast. Gears confirmed, all green. Altitude, 1,200, Rains added. Speeds holding. Eliza's hands tightened on the yoke. She tilted the aircraft slightly right, aiming. Off-center to compensate for wind direction. A precision combat landing used in high-risk zones with minimal margin for error. But she didn't blink. Didn't sweat, Dennis whispered. You ever think you'd do this again? No, she replied quietly. But I promised myself if I was ever called again, I wouldn't say no. Ahead, the runway shimmered beneath the rain. Eliza made one last adjustment. Throttle 10%, rudder right, flare on my mark. Seconds passed like minutes. Then, flare. The nose lifted slightly. The landing gear touched. The wheels hit the tarmac. Hard, but clean. The cabin jolted. Screams and cheers erupted. The brakes roared. Tires screeched against the wet concrete. Spray flew up along both sides. Eliza kept the aircraft centered as it slowed. Finally. Silence. The aircraft rolled to a complete stop. Dennis looked over, eyes wide. Captain Rains dropped his head into his hands, laughing with relief. And Eliza Shaw just let go of the yoke and sat back. No. Applause. No fanfare, not just another mission. Flown through the noise. As the jet came to a stop on the drenched emergency strip, the rain still hammering the metal like 1,000 tiny fists, Eliza sat motionless for a moment. She wasn't out of breath. Her hands didn't shake. But deep inside, something stirred, an old echo of adrenaline she hadn't felt in years. Dennis exhaled first. That ... was insane? Captain Rains gave a weak chuckle. I don't think we'd have made it down without you, Commander. Eliza looked at him and gave a soft nod, neither confirming nor denying her title. We're down. That's what matters. In the cabin, stunned silence followed the chaotic landing. It took a full 5 seconds before someone clapped, then another. And suddenly, thunderous applause erupted raw and real. Not the kind that follows a smooth arrival, but the kind that rises from people who realize how close they came to dying. Back near row 9, a teenage boy stood up on his seat and looked toward the cockpit door. Who was that? He asked his father. Breathless, simply muttered, a ghost, or maybe an angel. Flight attendants tried regaining composure, gathering themselves to guide passengers through protocol. But even they looked toward the cockpit in awe. The intercom crackled. Captain Rains' voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. Well, technically, your co-pilot for today. I'd like to thank you for your patience, your strength, and your calm under pressure. And I'd like to personally thank someone very special aboard, Flight 828, a woman many of you may have overlooked. But her name, or rather her call sign, is Echo Sierra. Passengers looked around, murmuring. Echo Sierra? She's the reason we're all standing. Please join me in thanking Commander Eliza Shaw. More applause. But Eliza didn't come out. Instead, she remained seated in the jump seat beside the cockpit door, watching quietly, the echo of her past mission still flickering in her mind. She hadn't expected this moment. She hadn't wanted it. She had boarded this plane as a civilian, faded into the crowd. And now, once again, she had become something else, something more. As the emergency vehicles flanked the plane, and the tower gave clearance to begin evacuations, Dennis turned to her. You should go out there. They need to see you. Eliza smiled faintly. I didn't do it for them. He tilted his head. Then why? She looked out the rain-streaked window toward the lights flashing red and blue. Because I still can. Back outside, the Birmingham Airport rescue teams rushed forward. Fuel lines were checked, landing gear inspected, and the wet tarmac lit up with flashlights and sirens. Inside, the Air Marshal Torres stepped forward quickly. He moved up the aisle, flashing his badge. He knocked lightly on the cockpit door. May I? Eliza opened it. Torres studied her. I knew it. You're Echo Sierra. Eliza Shaw. Eliza's eyes held his. That name doesn't mean much anymore, he scoffed. It just saved 211 lives. She said nothing. I read about you, he continued. They said you ghosted after Kandahar, that you disappeared for good. I had to. He looked around the cockpit, still stunned by the precision she demonstrated. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? She leaned slightly forward. Because sometimes it's not about being recognized. It's about being ready. He nodded. Well, you were that. Eliza glanced at the open door behind him. The terminal stairs were being wheeled up. People were starting to leave. She had to go before cameras arrived. I need to disappear. Again, she said quietly. Torres reached into his pocket and handed her a card. If you ever don't want to. She pocketed it without looking. Down the steps. Families were being reunited. Medics checked vitals. Journalists scrambled to gather details, and airline staff tried to contain the crowd. No one noticed the woman in the brown leather jacket and black cap stepping off the last stair quietly, without a word, without luggage. A young girl, the same one who had watched her through the seats, caught sight of her and tugged on her mom's sleeve. "There she is," she whispered. Eliza paused. The girl ran up to her, holding a tiny paper airplane she'd folded from the airline menu. "Are you a superhero?" Eliza knelt slowly, smiled gently, and said, "No, sweetheart, just someone who used to fly." "But you still do," the girl said confidently. Eliza touched the tip of the paper plane. "Only when I'm needed." She stood, gave the girl a little salute, and turned toward the quiet part of the tarmac. Walking away from the crowd, the cameras never caught her. The news headlines that night focused on a mysterious female pilot who helped land a failing jet during a severe storm. Interviews poured in. People speculated. The FIA released a vague statement. The airline refused to identify her, but some knew. People like Torres, people like Dennis, and somewhere, in a government vault, a classified log entry updated for the first time in 12 years. Call sign, Echo Sierra status, active mission, complete. 3 hours after the landing, inside a quiet back office of Birmingham Airport, Agent Torres sat across from a Department of Homeland Security liaison. The room was small, no windows, no cameras, just walls thick with silence and the weight of unspoken rules. Torres slid a folder across the table. "That's everything. Passenger manifest, black box download, crew statements. And this," he tapped the front page, "is the name you need to circle." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Eliza Shaw?" Torres leaned back. "Echo Sierra." The DHS agent stared at the name. "I thought she was dead." "She was," Torres said quietly. "Or at least she wanted to be." The agent opened the folder, flipping past diagrams and transcriptions of Eliza's voice on the cockpit recorder. "Why now? Why today?" Torres looked up, because the mission found her again. Eliza, meanwhile, walked through a quiet motel hallway just outside the city. She moved like a shadow hood up, jacket zipped, head down. No one noticed her as she passed. No one questioned the silence around her. Inside her room, she locked the door, pulled the curtains, and set down her only bag. She pulled off her jacket, laid her old boots by the bed, and stood still, listening to the muffled sounds of distant traffic. In front of the mirror, she caught her own eyes for the first time in hours. This was the face that had guided 211 lives through fire. But to her, it was just her, worn, tired, human. She opened her duffel and pulled out a small, battered box. Inside it was the only thing that ever traveled with her across cities and years, a folded military insignia and a photograph from 12 years ago. A younger Eliza, uniform crisp, arm around a fellow pilot, Kandahar, the last mission before. Everything shattered. She touched the corner of the photo and whispered, "I didn't forget, Liam." Then she folded it back and placed it gently in the box. Across the city, in a secure hangar, Captain Rains gave an interview to the FAA review board. He recounted every detail of the emergency Eliza's entry into the cockpit, her actions, her command presence. "She didn't hesitate," he said. "She didn't panic. She read the storm better than any pilot I've flown with in 20 years. Did she ever give you orders?" The investigator asked. Rains smiled faintly. "Not orders. She gave instructions, and we followed." "Why?" "Because she was the pilot we needed." By morning, the story had gone viral. News anchors replayed simulated flight paths. Experts debated how a non-commercial pilot could navigate a crippled aircraft through a Category 3 thunderstorm. "She's a hero," one analyst said on live TV. "But also, she's a mystery." Airline reps refused to comment. The captain and first officer gave statements, praising an unnamed civilian aviator for her assistance. And slowly, the public's obsession grew. Hashtag Who is Echo trended worldwide. Back in her motel room, Eliza turned off the TV. She picked up the card Torres had given her. His number, his name, and a message scrawled on the back. The world still needs people like you. She stared at it. She had been done. She'd left it behind, the medals, the missions, the call signs. But then row 9 happened. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. The sky hadn't stopped calling. She had just stopped answering. Her fingers hovered over the card. But instead of dialing, she reached for her laptop. One she hadn't touched in years. She typed in a string of codes, an old military login, long deactivated, or so she thought. A green light blinked. Access granted. A new screen opened. Operation Echo Return Classification. Above top SECRET. She leaned back, eyes narrowing. It was still there. A buried folder. Her last mission brief. One line at the top. If she ever resurfaces, activate Echo. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Eliza closed the laptop. She moved to the door and opened it a crack. Agent Torres stood on the other side. I had a feeling you'd still be here. She said nothing, just stepped aside to let him in. He handed her a manila envelope. New identity, passport, flight out. Eliza didn't take it. Instead, she asked, "Why was I on that flight, Torres? Out of all the planes in the air, why that one?" Torres didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, he said, "Because some things aren't coincidence." Eliza stared hard at him. So it was a setup. "No," he said softly. "It was a test." She sat down, the words settling heavy. "I wasn't ready." He smiled faintly. "You passed anyway." She looked down at the envelope. Her old life or her next one? Torres leaned forward. "This doesn't have to be the end. It wasn't supposed to be a beginning." He stood. "Then let it be a return." That night, Eliza stood in the airport terminal once more. A different airport. A new boarding pass. But as she waited for her next flight, she saw a child maybe 6 years old sitting with a toy jet in his hands. She walked over, crouched beside him. "Nice plane," she said. The boy grinned. "It flies better than anything." She smiled. "Wanna bet?" And for a moment, she wasn't Echo Sierra. She wasn't Eliza Shaw. She was just someone remembering what it meant to fly, and what it cost to stop. Eliza's new name on the boarding pass read Emma Stone. A quiet identity, built for silence, made to disappear into any crowd. Yet as she walked through Gate C-19, every step echoed like a countdown, not to an ending, but to a beginning she hadn't asked for. The airport was calm, a far cry from the chaos just 2 nights ago. No one recognized her now. No reporters. No phones pointed her way. She wore the same black hoodie, sunglasses, hair tied back. Another face in the crowd. Exactly what she'd always wanted. Yet something had changed. As she moved through the terminal. Snippets of conversations drifted toward her. "She saved that plane, didn't she?" "Some woman row 9, they said." She had a call sign. "Echo something." Eliza paused. Turned slowly. On a screen near the coffee shop, a news anchor spoke. "Still no official name has been released, but passengers are calling her the ghost in row 9. Unconfirmed military sources now link her to covert operations in the Middle East over a decade ago." Eliza shook her head gently. She didn't want fame or credit. She just wanted peace. But peace, it seemed, had other plans. Her flight boarded. A red-eye to Seattle. A quiet route. She chose a seat in row 12, this time window again. The clouds always looked softer from the edge of the world. As the plane filled up, A young woman took the seat beside her. Nervous hands, jittery leg, breathing. Fast? You okay? Eliza asked gently. The woman looked over, surprised by the kindness. I hate flying, Eliza smiled faintly. I understand. I almost canceled this flight, but I saw that story about the woman in row 9. I figured, if someone like her could be on a plane, maybe I'd be okay. Eliza's heart skipped. I don't know who she is, the woman continued, but something about her made me feel safe. Eliza turned toward the window, her voice soft. You'll be just fine. Miles away, in Washington, D.C., a private meeting convened inside. The Pentagon. 4-star generals, intelligence directors, and one man in a civilian suit Torres stood at the head of the table. He placed a file on the table marked, Operation Phoenix Return. She's active, he said quietly. One of the generals raised an eyebrow. Voluntarily? Torres nodded. Not officially. But she's watching. She logged into the ecosystem. Is she ready for field work again? She doesn't know yet. But she's closer than she's been in years. And the others? Someone asked. Torres opened another file. They're all watching too. Once she moves, they'll follow. Back in the air, Eliza gazed down at the clouds glowing under moonlight. Flying had once defined her life. Then it had almost destroyed it. But here, in the quiet hum of altitude, she felt something stir again. Not adrenaline, not fear. Purpose. She closed her eyes. A voice from long ago whispered through memory. You were born to fly above the noise. Eliza, never forget who you are. She opened her eyes, looked out at the stars, and smiled. The plane landed just before dawn. As passengers disembarked, the young woman beside her turned and said, Thanks for talking to me. I hope the world finds that woman in row 9 someday. She deserves a medal. Eliza gave a faint smile. Sometimes the ones who deserve medals never want them. The woman laughed softly. Maybe, but I hope she knows she made a difference. As she walked off the plane, Eliza lingered in the aisle for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket and placed something on the empty seat. A folded napkin with a single line written in black ink. Echo Sierra is always watching the skies. 3 weeks later, an anonymous package arrived at a school in Denver. Inside, a flight captain's pin, a children's drawing of a jet, and a letter that read, To the girl who said she wanted to fly one day, keep dreaming. The sky is always yours. Row 9. That same day, a different envelope reached Agent Torres's desk. No return address. Inside, a single photo. Eliza, standing on the tarmac of an unnamed airfield, gear bags slung over her shoulder, windswept. Hair, steely eyes, and one handwritten line across the bottom. Ready for the next mission. The legend of row 9 only grew from there. PODC ACTS debated her identity. Conspiracy forums called her a government ghost. Pilots whispered stories about a woman who could land the plane blindfolded. Veterans spoke of Echo Sierra like a myth, half hero, half warning, but no one ever found her. No photo. No confession. Just stories passed from seat to seat, cockpit to cockpit, like a sacred tale. She became more than a name. She became a signal. For courage, for calm. For second chances. And somewhere, above some distant coastline, a woman looked out of a cockpit window. Her hands rested on the controls. Her call sign stitched onto the jacket. Beneath her vest, Echo Sierra. Invisible, untouchable, watching, protecting, flying. END.